Hey YouTube, welcome back to my third episode of my spray journals. So I thought I'd give you another bit of a geology lesson for the Canterbury Plains, just to fill you in a wee bit more on how things roll out here. So we'll zoom into Ashburton again, and so what I'll point out on this one is there's a couple of main rivers. To the north there's the Rakai River, there's a smaller river running through Ashburton, and then to the south there's the Rangitata River. Now, these are what's called braided rivers, and I'll show you what that means in a little bit. But essentially, there's a couple other little less significant rivers that run through as well in different areas, but we won't focus on those. So, the Ashburton River, which runs through Ashburton, as you'd imagine, you can see that it splits into various branches here. So we've got the south branch and the north branch there, and it joins up just inland of Ashburton. And as we follow it up here, you actually see, we'll follow the south branch, and you actually see here it ends at the beginning of the foothills there. So it's an east coast catchment, or an eastern side catchment, and here's the other side of it here, which again has the catchment here. Now, so what that means in real terms is that you need easterly rain, or a rain that's coming in from the eastern side to fill the river. And it does get snow water coming down it for part of the year, but it's not particularly significant. And in the summertime and early autumn, it does tend to get quite low. Now, as we come across here, we'll take you to the Rakai River. Now, you'll see, obviously, it's a much larger river, and what I was alluding to earlier about the braided rivers is, now, if I zoom in here, you can see the channels of the water. Now, from bank to bank, from the left side to the right side, it's just one big gravel plain. And what the water does, and how it gets its name, is it follows braids in the river, so it creates its own braids. Now, that means that within this gravel plain here, from week to week, month to month, year to year, the river doesn't actually follow the exact same path. It's still within its plain there, but it does change. So these may change. It might flow on the right side of the river at one point, and then the south side the next. It's constantly changing, which is fairly unique in terms of rivers worldwide. I think Canterbury has some of the better examples of them in the world, and as well as Canada, and there's probably a few other places around as well. Now, as we come further inland, you'll see that it comes through this natural gorge here, which is called the Rakai Gorge, where it gets all forced into one channel. And as we carry on further inland, so we're following the river upstream here, it sort of starts to widen out, and I'll zoom out a little bit, and then it gets wider and wider. You'll see Lake Coleridge there, which is a power generating lake. There's a hydroelectric station there. But following the river further, you'll see it widens out quite significantly there. And I'll zoom out again some more here. So you can see that it branches off into various other branches. The Rakai River is the one that comes off to the left, to the bottom of the screen here. The Wilberforce River here, which goes more straight up. And then, as you'll see, it kind of comes all the way to the edge here. Now, what I'm getting at with this here is this river here is much more consistent flowing. It does get lower in the summer again and early autumn. But what it does get is significant spillover from the west coast. So, as I alluded to earlier, in an earlier video, we get a lot of westerly weather pattern here. So a westerly wind or westerly bearing rain front might come in, and it'll come along and it'll hit the Southern Alps. It'll be forced to rise and dumps its rain. Now, in the previous video, I alluded to the fact that the west coast gets somewhere along the lines of 6 metres of rain, and then if we come to the edge of the Canterbury Plains, it comes back down to about 1,000 mils or even less. So again, what this means in terms for our farming is that this river is more consistent, and so it's good for irrigation water. It also gets a lot of snow fed during the summer, so it doesn't entirely run dry or anything like that. There's usually a bit of flow, and then when we get these westerly winds, it comes through and it I guess you'd say it spills over into the east side, and then the river brings that water down. There are a number of irrigation schemes coming off that, and they are subject to some restriction again. If the river flows do get too low, then they're forced to be turned off, or the water is restricted. There is some storage available in Lake Coleridge where they will then deliberately let more water out of Lake Coleridge and into the river, and then it gets picked up later for the irrigation. That, to an extent, is bought storage, so you actually have to pay for the rights to have water allocated to you out of Lake Coleridge. Further to that, when there is a westerly wind blowing with the rain in the mountains filling up the river, being northwesterly, we get the Fon wind, which is a warm wind, so it'll be pissing down with rain on the west coast, and on the east coast there might be some high cloud, but it'll be in the 20 degrees, or even warmer. It can be 25, 30 degrees if you get the right conditions. And so what that does mean is it's reasonably handy for the sake of when it's warm like that, you do need more irrigation, so the river's full when it's quite hot. And then if I zoom over further over here, this is the Rangitata River. Now it's slightly smaller than the Rakaia, but again, if I follow it up, it comes to its own natural gorge there. And then if we follow it right the way up here, it does have the same idea of the catchment. It's quite far west, and it gets a lot of spillover from the west coast, and as well as it gets a lot of snow-fed water down it. Now, this was one of the original irrigation schemes here. So back in the 40s, they decided they wanted to take water out of here. Now, this is called the Rangitata Diversion Race. Now, it's been fairly pivotal in the history of the Canterbury Plains for irrigation, and it's been developed further over the years. But back in the day, it was fairly revolutionary. It allowed us in dry times to irrigate parts of our farm. I'll come back to that another time for another video, but I just thought I'd let you in on that part just to give you an idea of where our water actually comes from. And on to some spraying. So I'll start out here. We're actually in a paddock of grass, even though it does kind of look like a paddock of brassica or something coming up. It's a case here again of it's a paddock of grass that is starting to be overrun by the previous crop's volunteers now, or volunteer seedlings. So we're just coming through with a bit of MCPA, and that'll roll the easy stuff there, and that's sort of what it's about, the early stage, just removing the competition so that the grass can get established. We'll quite likely come back through again, as will be shown in this next video. This next video, and so this video here is actually, we have been in this paddock a few weeks ago, or we have been on this paddock probably a month ago, where we put some MCPA out just to stop those volunteer seedlings overtaking the grass that was supposed to be here. So in this second pass, we've actually come back with something a bit tougher, because some of the slower growing but harder to kill weeds have started coming through now. So we're actually taking care of those. The grass itself is now more established, and it can handle now the stronger brew, which allows us to take out those harder to kill weeds without damaging the grass. You can tell from the amount of grass spraying clips that I'm showing you here, this is the time of year we start establishing the grass, so grass seed crops. So what happens this time of year is it's starting to get established. This stuff here will probably be about 6 weeks old, I guess, from the time of planting. So it's starting to get established. Now, again, we're taking out the broadleaf in this one, but you can see when the camera pans to the front that I'm actually following what looks like the old header swath. Now, you can see it was an ex-paddock of barley, and there is quite a lot of volunteer barley growing in that line. You can almost see quite clearly. So there's not really a lot that will effectively take that out. So what usually happens is when the grass gets growing enough, and once the spraying with holding periods come off, the paddock will actually be grazed for grass over the winter and autumn and winter, and the barley can't handle being grazed, and so it'll be grazed a good couple of times by the sheep, most likely sheep or cows, but most likely sheep. And so the grazing takes out that barley. It really doesn't become a problem. It just gets grazed off, and then that takes care of the barley problem. If it's left unchecked, the barley will continue to grow, and that'll be a problem for the yield of the grass. And what we're in here now is actually a freshly drilled paddock of red beet. So that's going to be red beet for seed. So what I'm spraying on now is a pre-emergent, so post-drilling pre-emerging. And for establishing red beet, it's actually really critical in the early stages to get on the top of weeds. It's actually a hard one to spray the weeds out of, and there's actually quite a few other bits and pieces that'll happen throughout the year to get on top of the weeds. But the first couple of months, even though we're going into winter, everything will be quite slow, but the first couple of months, it's going to be sprayed a lot, but the actual strength of the chemical is quite low. The red beet itself can't actually handle a strong chemical brew. And so that's the battle we face a lot with spraying, especially getting things established, that's the balance between not killing what you want to keep. We're going to come through here repetitively with a lower rate, and the idea is just the weeds like it a little bit less than the red beet, and so we just whack it again and again. And with this one, if I looking forward, you can actually see it's in male and female rows as well. I was asked in a previous video why there's a couple of rows of male and then more rows of female. So the idea behind that is actually at pollination time. Now red beet is wind pollinated, but the carrots, they are bee pollinated. So it's all about just getting the spacing right so that the pollination happens fairly evenly. And what we're spraying in this one is actually a clover paddock, which was a clover seed crop. Now we're finishing this off with a bit of glyphosate and some cafentrazole ethyl, which has a brand name of Hammerforce. You might think, why are we bothering putting anything extra in? Well, glyphosate doesn't actually kill everything equally. Glyphosate will eventually kill it, or it'll make it sulk anyway and it won't grow, but the actual addition of Hammer into the tank mix, it's only a tiny amount, just kicks the burr up a bit hotter, and it'll kill it off much quicker, allowing the farmer to then plant next year's crop, whichever that may be. And finally here we have some curly kale. Now I've finally learnt to get out of the machine and actually get some close-ups of the things that I'm actually spraying so you guys can see. Especially this one, curly kale, would be a bit difficult to imagine. Again, this will be grown for seed, and so curly kale is just kale that you eat, I guess is the best way of explaining it. And it's a bit curlier than normal kale. So what we're spraying for again in here is last year's volunteer barley. We've put an insecticide in as well, just to keep the insect pressure down. And also there's another kind of broadleaf spray in there to take care of those thistles and everything else that's sort of growing. So this will slowly grow into the winter, and then probably at the end of winter, I'm guessing we'll start shooting up some flowers. So yeah, again, bit of weed and insect control going on here. And that's about it for today. We'll see you next time for some more riveting spraying stories.